Welcome back to episode 3 on Emptiness. Today we are going to explore a book called I, subtitled Reality and Subjectivity, which I consider to be the magnum opus of David R. Hawkins. When I first discovered a book by him, Power versus Force, I found in there a table of consciousness that he had created, and his work is verified using kinesiological testing, which is muscle testing, basically the body responding strong or weak depending on the stimulus it's given. So he says, he's got a lot of amazing quotes, and one he says is like, one of the greatest faults of humankind is the inability to tell truth from falsehood, and he claimed that now there's a way to do that, and he was a huge proponent of kinesiological testing, muscle testing, to get answers and to claim things as true. Now for me, I try to be as open-minded as possible, both ways, and I look at the idea, and if it works for me, I'm not as concerned about what is as dangerous grounds that I'm walking here. I'm going to say it's scientifically proven. I'm like, well, if it works for me, then that's enough. I don't care if there is a modern science to verify it, because if you wait your whole life for science to verify something, it might never get there, and it might mean that you're missing out on something huge and massive, and in fact true, because the way I see it, the feats of our greatest sciences are just trying to verify nature. It's like physics we're trying to understand the laws of nature, and it's like, how can you put the things that are trying to explain what you're experiencing above the thing that you're actually experiencing? So I'm not looking for science to validate my worldview, my reality. In fact, I don't want to give that power to anybody but myself. So when it comes to an idea like this, it's like, okay, he says it's been kinesiological tested and therefore it's verifiably true. And for me, I don't even care. Like, okay, that's great. Okay, cool. But like the ideas with or without their kinesiological testing ring true to me. Like when I first saw the table of consciousness as given in Power versus Force, which is the first of the trilogy. He has many books, but there's a trilogy of books: Power versus Force, Eye of the I, and I. And today we're just going to look at a small portion of I to see what he has to say about emptiness. And it plays really well from our previous video, which was on Buddhism, because he looks at common misconceptions in Buddhism. So let's dive into it here. So as I've said, we have reality and subjectivity, and this is a contemporary view. And here we have a quote: "The paradox of the void of nothingness versus the reality of allness is the last great positionality to be transcended." I love this man's work so much. I've learned so much. Even there's a prayer that he gives, and it's, "Dear Lord, please allow me to serve you, to be a vehicle for your divine love and channel for your will." And that's like one of my greatest affirmations, that just, it conjures such positive feelings within me. So let's dive in here. Okay, so from the chapter called The Final Doorway: "When the ego has been cleared of identifiable programs, it then faces dissolution, since its software or tapes have been erased. However, it has one trick still remaining, a great trap into which even famous spiritual adepts have fallen. This is the great confrontation with the supposed reality of the abyss of the void. That this is merely a product of the ego rather than reality is already known to students of these presentations. They will remember that there is no opposite to the allness of God. Nothingness is neither a possibility nor a reality. It is the ego's last desperate bid for survival. The groundwork for the acceptance and believability of this error has been laid by misunderstanding the teachings of the Buddha. The correct translation of the illumined state as void actually means devoid of content, not containing anything or form. It was misconstrued as meaning nothingness as the supposed opposite of allness. Using reason as a tool, it can be seen that nothingness cannot exist or be or represent a valid option." Okay, great. So what we're seeing here is it affirming what we discussed in the last. If you did not see the Emptiness Sunyata as talked about by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha that Mr. Hawkins did, Dr. Hawkins is talking about here, then you can go back and check that out. But if we dive into it a little bit here, he says the misunderstandings of the Buddha have led to this belief in nothingness as an opposite to the allness of God. But he's saying this is not a possibility. He's saying the correct translation of void as the illumined state means devoid of content, not containing anything or form. So we looked at with the Buddha how the emptiness as a verb rather than a noun, it was a process by which we are letting go of the temporary forms in order to just live as the awareness that we are. And I'm definitely stretching here. I'm definitely speaking my own interpretation. But here we have confluence. We have Dr. Hawkins saying that the misconception of the Buddha is what had led to the idea of nothingness as something opposite to God. There are so many things we could talk about with David Hawkins' work, and one thing I just want to point out here when we are talking about the correct translation of the illumined state as void actually means devoid of content. One of the things that have stuck with me the most from his work is the distinction between context and content. And what this is, so like when we're talking about levels of consciousness, there's a context, and within that context, there are different contents. So I and my neighbor might be living in a context of fear, which means we have similar energetic vibrations because we're both living in a context of fear, but the specific contents of the mind, I might be afraid of spiders or someone breaking in. They might be afraid of sickness of their family members. So there's a clear distinction between the content of the mind and the context, the atmosphere from which the contents arise. So when he's talking about the correct translation of the illumined state as void, actually meaning devoid of content, we can see like that themeless concentration of awareness that the Buddha was talking about, where there is a presence of awareness, but it's not anchored to any specific idea or content. So, the Buddha's pure descent, undistorted descent into emptiness, we can see that, like, again, we see how they're all tied together. We'll continue. Allness versus nothingness is a classical duality and is the ultimate pair of opposites to transcend. When one follows the strict pathway of negation, the state of void as such does indeed present itself. This results from the error of avoiding love due to the misunderstanding of love. The attachment to love is really the trap and the barrier to enlightenment. In reality, love is freedom, but attachment to love is a limitation. The void is indeed very, very impressive. One is beyond karma and all programs. This state appears to be infinite and endless, non-linear, and forever. It is so profound that it precludes any thought. It is a non-linearity devoid of any content. So in his work, he talks a lot about the linear and the non-linear, and this kind of when we're participating strictly within that three-dimensional world, we're bound by birth and death. But as the mind can break free from the conditions of temporality, then it can participate in the non-linear domain. So that last bolded section there, this state appears to be infinite. He's talking about the void as that it's very impressive, and it appears to be infinite, endless, non-linear, and forever. And it is so profound that it precludes any thought. It is a non-linearity devoid of any content. Importantly, however, there is something missing, and that is the presence of love. This state presents itself as beyond love, and therefore believable to the pathway of negation. So, I mean, this is definitely a loaded word, but if you look at his table of consciousness, and I'll link it in the information below the description. If you look at his table of consciousness, you'll see that love is a state which is beyond reason. So there's really, to put it really simply, there are different levels of consciousness, and he says anything above the level of 200 is conducive to life, and anything below the level of 200 is detrimental to life. And so this is a key point. This is a key turning point. And the state just below 200 is it pride? It's pride, I believe. the one just above is courage. So he's talking about as a species, Homo sapiens are at a critical juncture where we're crossing from pride into courage, and once we make that step, well, then the doorway has been opened, and we're on the way. We are now, well, our activities are conducive to life. And just because you enter that state doesn't mean you always stay in it. We fluctuate, at different stimulus evoke different consciousness levels, so it's this constant battle between. But as we open up more to truth of nature, reality, God, we can dwell in higher and higher states of consciousness, which are dissolving the oppositions. So many people are bound by this, this polar thinking, just like the I Ching talked about, this polarity. But when we understand the Tao, when we understand that it's not about being at the top of the wave or the bottom of the wave, but understanding that the wave function is actually what we're participating in, then we can be an observer. And no matter where we are on the spectrum, whether we're really high or we're really low that day, this we being like the very egoic identifier, like the thing that's like, oh, look, Daniel's sad today, Daniel's depressed, he thinks he's not worth himself, or Daniel's look, he's so happy today, man, wow, like how beautiful life is and everything. If we can just take a step back and just see, oh, look, like today Daniel is high, he's got all of these positive things going on, his mind, he's very happy and content, and then, oh, today he's sad, blah blah blah. But like to take a step back and just see that we are just like on this journey, and not to be too attached to the thoughts. And so this is where the Buddhist practice of witnessing the thoughts comes in handy, and starting to detach ourselves from the positionalities here. And the teachings all do serve each other as well. That's a brief look at David Hawkins and his view on emptiness. His work, I do like, so brilliant, and so many of the people I read are thousands of years old, hundreds of years old. And David Hawkins, he died in my lifetime. Like, this book was published in 2003, so it's very it's definitely the most contemporary thing we will look at, and I can't speak highly enough about his work. And the Table of Consciousness has given in Power versus Force. If you can pick up a copy of Power versus Force, it is the most entry-level work I think he has. But this one is quite, like, the writing is very advanced. He's got a lot of books. A lot of them are a lot more accessible. I'd definitely work your way up to this one. But it's all just packed with truth and helpful things in order to remove yourself from suffering and be truly liberated and live a life of peace. So I highly recommend his work and his books. Next up, I believe we're going to go into the Hermetic principles. Well, let's just check that. Next up we have, yes, Hermeticism. We're going to continue to explore, but it's going to take a little bit of a different turn, because we're going to look at allness. The first of the Hermetic principles is that the mind is all. And so we're starting to stray a little bit from emptiness, but as we saw with like Taoism at the very beginning, this is the state from which all things emerge and all things return. So we look at next up we'll look at the most fundamental of the Hermetic principles, the mind is all, and how all things emerge from it. So stay tuned, it's going to be fun.